Hello, welcome back. So today we are going to jump right into the immune system day 2. So this is lesson 2 for your week of lessons, and we're going to be learning about the immune system day 2. So go ahead and set up your notes, and then I want you to just jot down what is the body's first line of defense against disease. So basically what we learned about last class is what was the body's first line of defense against disease. So take a second and think in your head, or just go ahead and write down what that is, and then meet me back here. Okay, hopefully you said that it was those barriers. So the skin and mucous membranes are the body's first line of defense against disease. And we talked a lot about blood clotting because blood clotting also helps to prevent invaders from entering the body when your skin is not intact. So hopefully you mentioned those first lines of defense. So today we are going to talk about the body's second and third defenses against disease. It's a lot, but I think you'll find it relatively interesting and again, very timely. So please bear with me. I know y'all can do it. It is topic 6 out of 6, and you again can come up with this. Why is it important to protect against disease? And if you don't already understand this picture, you will understand this picture by the end of today. Our immune system, when a virus enters the body for the first time, is like Patrick, like, oh my God, what's going on? And then the immune system, when the same virus attacks again, is like Avengers Endgame, like, we got this. So you'll understand that by the end of today. Okay, so let's jump in. What is our second line of defense? Again, you've actually already had a little bit of an exposure to this when we talked about the blood system, because our blood system and our immune system work in tandem with each other, because our white blood cells are a huge part of our blood system, which we already talked about, and our immune system. So our second line of defense against infectious disease is called the innate immune system. It is non-specific in its response. We learned about the white blood cell, or the leukocyte, same thing, that helps with this non-specific response already. We're going to learn more about it and go more in depth with it today. So the main component is phagocytes. So phagocytic white blood cells that engulf and digest foreign bodies. We learned about phagocytes during the last section on the blood system and how they have a non-specific response. They basically just eat everything, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth with that. Some other components of the innate immune system that we're not going to go as in depth with, they include inflammation, fever, and antimicrobial chemicals and proteins. So your body gets a fever because not viruses because they're dead, but bacteria and viruses will denature at a certain temperature, but it's also bad for you to have a really high fever too, so it's kind of funny like that. But that's why you get a fever. It's your body actively trying to fight off pathogen. So the innate immune system, it is going to have two key properties. This is our second line of defense, and it does not differentiate between different types of pathogens, meaning it is non-specific. It is going to be the same for any pathogen that enters your body. And it responds to the infection in the same way every time, meaning it is non-adaptive. So this innate immune response is non-specific and non-adaptive. So make sure you have that. Okay, so let's jump in. The most important part about understanding the innate immune system is just understanding the way that phagocytes work and respond to any invading pathogen. For all the things we're doing today, I'm gonna do it in words because it's a lot of words, and then the next slide is gonna be in pictures. So if you're like reading the words and trying to write it down and getting really lost, maybe sit, listen, look at the picture, and then go back and figure out if you need to draw or write it. But let's jump right in. So phagocytosis, we've actually learned about that, y'all. It is the process by which solid materials, such as pathogens, are ingested by a cell. We call this cell eating. We learned about endocytosis, and the two types of endocytosis were phagocytosis and pinocytosis. And we called phagocytosis like the cell eating, and then pinocytosis was the cell drinking, so making those connections. But basically all it is the cell taking in that pathogen. So phagocytic leukocytes. This is like two crazy long words, right? So you need to know what phagocytes do. You can remember that phagocytes do phagocytosis. They eat the invading pathogen, and a leukocyte is a white blood cell. We already learned that during the blood system videos, but if you forget, just leukocyte equals white blood cell. But they circulating in the blood through that blood plasma, and they move into the body tissues in response to infection. So a damaged tissue is going to release chemicals, and one of those chemicals is histamine, which is basically like sounding the alarm. Let's say that a bacteria lands in your body, then your body cells are going to sound that alarm through histamine and be like, hey, white blood cells, we need you here now. And that's going to draw those white blood cells to the site of infection. And then those pathogens will be engulfed through the phagocyte. So basically, I'm going to show you in the picture. This will make a lot more sense. Let's see if you can see me. The phagocyte is going to basically extend around the pathogen and draw it inside. And they call those cellular extensions pseudopodia. Pod or podia means foot, or like, it does mean foot. So it's like a pseudo foot or pseudo hand grabbing the pathogen. That's just a fun little fact. But basically they surround the pathogen and draw it inside to form an internal vesicle with the pathogen inside of it. And then those vesicles will then fuse to a lysosome. You already know what a lysosome does. You should. It's like the garbage man of a cell, right? So that vesicle that has the pathogen in it is going to fuse to the lysosome, and then it forms what we call a phagolysosome, and the pathogen gets digested or destroyed. And sometimes pathogen fragments, so basically the phagocyte destroys the pathogen, and then what it will do is it'll save some of the fragments of that pathogen, and it will, which we call antigens, and it's going to put it on the surface of the phagocyte to basically stimulate our third line of defense. So as a reminder, the phagocytes, this is all of our second line of defense. It's non-specific. It is non-adaptive. It's the same for everything. But right at the end, when it releases those antigens to your body, it's basically telling our third line of defense, like, come on, let's get this response going. Here's that picture I promised you that I personally think makes it make so much more sense. Here's our pathogen, right? Here's our bacteria. Let's say it's strep, our strep bacteria. And then this really long cell, that's our phagocyte. The pathogen is going to get ingested through phagocytosis, and this is what they call those pseudopodia. It's like an extension of the cell. It is going to ingest it, as we see here, and bring it inside, which we see here. The lysosome is going to connect to it, which we call the phagolysosome, digest it, and you see it broke down this bacteria into little pieces of bacteria, and then it can present those antigens. So we call those little pieces of bacteria antigens, and then the phagocyte will have those antigens, and that will stimulate that third defense. Cool. We did the second line of defense. We're already halfway done, which is awesome. Okay, so what is our third line of defense against disease? Our third line of defense against infectious disease is called the adaptive immune system. It is called the adaptive immune system because it's specific in its response. That's why I have this lock and key here. It is going to be different for every pathogen that your body encounters, essentially. It is going to be able to differentiate between a particular pathogen and then target a response that's specific to that pathogen. It also can respond really rapidly upon re-exposure to a specific pathogen, and preventing symptoms from developing. This is what we call immunological memory. This is basically the third line of defense is what vaccines are meant to stimulate. When you get a vaccine, it is basically activating this, creating this third line of defense before you even get exposed to the actual virus that the vaccine is giving you immunity for. It is basically to make up that lag in response time to try and get it to where you won't get sick because your body's already created specific responses for the specific disease. Let's continue on with lymphocytes. Lymphocytes are going to be a key component of the adaptive immune system. It's basically the adaptive immune system is controlled by lymphocytes. And you're probably like, okay, what's a lymphocyte? A lymphocyte is a class of leukocyte. If you remember, a leukocyte is a white blood cell, and it results in the production of antibodies. So all a lymphocyte is, it's a type of white blood cell that produces antibodies. I'm going to tell you what antibodies are on the next slide, so don't worry. But the two type of lymphocytes that you've actually probably heard of before, the first are B lymphocytes or B cells. They produce antibodies that recognize and target a particular pathogen fragment or an antigen, which I'm going to tell you about in the next slide too. And then there are helper T cells or helper T lymphocytes. These are regulator cells that release chemicals to activate the B cells. So the B cells produce the antibodies for a specific pathogen, and the helper T cells kind of help to activate those B cells and get them going. And there's my B cell and T cell to serve and protect. Okay, so antigens and antibodies, because the last slide talks about antigens and antibodies. You need to know what they are, right? So an antigen is a substance that the body recognizes as foreign, and that will induce an immune response. So if your body recognizes antigens in its system, it's like, okay, sound the alarm, we've got to respond to this threat. Antibodies are basically the fighter of antigens. So an antibody is a protein that is produced by B cells. It also is produced by plasma cells, which you're going to see in a minute, and it is specific to a given antigen. So the structure, because it's interesting to know, antibodies are made of 4 polypeptide or protein chains that are joined together to form Y-shaped molecules. I'm going to show you a picture after this, don't worry. And the ends of the arms of the Y are where the antigen binds, and these areas are what's going to be different between different antibodies. But the rest of the molecule is constant, and it basically serves as a recognition site for the immune system to be like, hey, that's an antibody. And then each type of antibody is going to recognize a unique antigen, making these antigen-antibody interactions very specific. And if it's reminding you of enzymes and substrates, it should. It's lock and key, just like enzymes and substrates. Every antigen that your body encounters is your body is going to produce an antibody to fight that pathogen, and it's always going to be specific to that pathogen. This is that third adaptive immune response. Here's a really great picture that shows this. So this just shows the antibody structure. It shows the 4 protein chains that form that Y-shaped body, Y-shaped antibody, and then this yellow site here, that is the variable region. That region is going to be different for different pathogens that invade. And then over here, this shows you the different antigen specificity. So let's say this green guy is a virus that invades the body. Then this, or let's say the green guy is chickenpox, right? Your body has produced produced antibodies that are specific to the chickenpox antigen, either because you got chickenpox or because you got a vaccine for the chickenpox, right? So when the chickenpox infects you, your body has these antibodies to immediately kind of deactivate that threat. Whereas this might be the antigen for the flu, right? And you got your flu vaccine this year, so your body produced these antibodies against the flu. So that top region is the only thing that's going to be different for each antigen and antibody. Okay, so now, just like we talked about the way that phagocytes work, we're going to talk about the way that lymphocytes work, specifically the way that B cells and T cells work. And again, I'm going to give you the words and then the picture. So after we go back to where we were at the end for the phagocytes. So the phagocytic leukocyte engulf the pathogen. They present those antigens on the surface. I'll go back and show you really quick that picture so you can see. So our second line of defense has happened, and now our body is presenting those antigens, basically saying, hey, we got this new pathogen here. Can someone create a response against this pathogen, please? So that's what's happening, and that is what triggers this third line of response, or third line of defense. So basically, those antigen presenting cells, the phagocytes, actually are going to travel to your lymph nodes and activate specific helper T cells. If you've ever had your mom or your dad or somebody check your lymph nodes to see if they're swollen right here, that's because your lymph nodes swell when you're having an immune response, because they're activating all of these cells to try and fight this pathogen. So those phagocytes are going to go to the lymph nodes and say, hey, helper T cells, I need you. And those helper T cells are going to basically lock on to that antigen, and it's going to release chemicals, which we call cytokines, and they activate B cells, which can then produce antibodies specific to the antigen for that pathocyte. And then the B cells are going to basically start dividing and differentiating to form what we call plasma cells, which only form when there's an active immune response, and it's basically just going to produce a lot of that antibody. So your body's like sounding the alarm, producing a ton of antibodies against this pathogen. And then those antibodies are going to target that specific antigen, so that specific pathogen, and it's going to basically enhance the ability of the immune system to recognize and destroy that pathogen. And then, interestingly, if you've never been infected with this disease before, a small proportion of those activated B cells and T cells will develop into what we call memory cells to provide long-lasting immunity, so that when or if you get reinfected with that pathogen, your body doesn't have to go through this whole process of creating antibodies. It already has them, and it just has to activate them and jump into action much quicker, which is why we have that meme at the beginning with Avengers Endgame when you get reinfected. And then here is that picture I promised you. This one's a little bit more complicated, but it does really show what's happening. This shows both the innate immunity and the adaptive immunity. So if we look on this side, this is showing us what we learned about before. This microbe or disease infects a cell, and then the phagocyte is going to come and eat that microbe or bacteria and destroy it, essentially, and then it's going to produce those antigens, right? So it's saying, hey, here are the antigens. It's going to go to your lymph node and activate the T cell right here, which is like, oh, this is the antigen you're talking about? Cool, thanks for passing it off to me. And then that T cell is going to activate the T cell is going to activate other T cells and then activate the B cell, right? So here is a B cell that has not yet been activated, does not have a specific antibody. And then in this case, the T cell basically says, hey, here's this antigen, you need to make an antibody to fight it. And the B cell is going to activate, then it's going to basically divide into plasma cells, and all of those plasma cells are going to produce a ton of these antibodies to fight that specific disease. And then some of these plasma B cells and T cells will become memory cells. Okay, so that is it for your notes. I know it was a lot. I know you probably had to pause me a couple times because you're like, oh my gosh, Ms. Panzer, slow down. But the good thing about a YouTube video is you can rewind it, you can slow it down, you can speed it up, you can skip, whatever you need to do. So your activity for today, your only other activity for the week, I tried to, because I knew it was notes heavy, make just 2 short activities. You're going to do the Google Form worksheet. And basically, using your notes, you're doing this storyboard activity, and it's just going to ask you to explain the body's immune response in response to someone getting a paper cut. And that's all you need to do for today. So go ahead and use those notes to answer those questions. I also am going to post a link I'll post 2 links to 2 really good videos that explain the immune system. If you feel like you need a little bit more help or a little bit more clarity on some of the things that are happening in the immune system. But also, if you feel like that, please come to office hours to say hello and to ask me those questions. I know the immune system can be a little bit complicated, but I am here to help you. So come say hi to me during office hours. And if I don't see you at office hours, I hope y'all have a wonderful, awesome, fabulous weekend. And I'll see y'all next week.